Welcome to the Family Pictures Podcast. I'm Michael Branson Smith, and I'm here with
Jim Groom.
And we are here to do our last Cameron Crowe film, which is a film about the adults just don't fucking get it.
Nope.
And that is Fast Times at Ridgemont High, 1982. The film in which Cameron Crowe, based on his book, wherein he was a 22-year-old allowed to go undercover back to high school. Imagine that today, right? Hey, let's let this 22-year-old man hang out in high school for a full year pretending to be a teenager.
Maybe
Sounds
he's like Rod, the stereo salesman in that version.
Are you sure you're 19? Oh, God. Yeah. And so he wrote this book after spending a year at Claremont High School in San Diego, California in 1980, and he was 22 at the time. And the book becomes a bit of a phenomenon, and it's turned into the film 2 years later, directed by Amy Heckerling, who herself was quite young. She was 27, and it was her first commercial film, because prior to that, she'd only done student films. And, you know, she and Cameron Crowe just clicked. They clicked on, let's make this about the mall a lot. Let's allow these teenagers to. I know we're in the mode where Porky's is awesome, and we're gonna try we're gonna kind of submarine this in as a teen sex comedy, but it's actually a drama, and it's actually taking teenagers and their thoughts and their awkwardness and their shame seriously, and there's crying and there's abortions and there's awkward sex, and it's not just like boys leering at women through peepholes in the shower.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
And so, there's a lot of cool backstory because, this film, not unlike The Wildlife, which came after this, was also not understood by the adults, just like the characters who ignore the adults for pretty much the entire film. The adults, i.e. the producers from Universal Pictures, didn't get this film either. And there's two great stories. The first one that's kind of fun is when they did a screening in Orange County, and you had this is like literally where Richard Nixon grew up, and it was like the Reagan Revolution is born out of Orange County, which is just south of the LA County. And they showed it to a bunch of teenagers there, and they're like so freaking prudish. They were like, "We're not like this." They're like, it made me just like, help, I'm being repressed. It's like, of course you're doing all this shit, and you just don't want to be told this to your conservative faces, which was just so awesome. And the cool thing is the producer, Art Linson, was like, screw those people. That's just not the right audience. Meanwhile, I'm sure people line out the door in Orange County to watch it later on. But at the same time, they got super conservative. There was no media for this. There was no TV commercials. There was nothing, and they opened it in just 200 theaters around LA. And Amy Heckerling talks, in one of many, many, interviews later about how the film, she had a friend call her up in her apartment, and she says, "You have to go to West Hollywood." And she's like, "Why?" She's like, "Just go see what's happening." And so she goes to see her film being screened there, and there are dozens of teenagers repeating lines, right? And she said it was just, to this day, one of the most magical experiences she's ever had as a filmmaker, is to see your film take the culture by the, wrap your arms around the culture and just be so important in the moment. And so they eventually tried to catch up. They tried to get it in more theaters, but it had ultimately kind of a limited release. It made money and it did great, ultimately, relatively speaking. But more importantly, this is what leads to the John Hughes contract with the same production company that leads to, 5 straight teen films in 5 years, giving us 16 Candles, Breakfast Club, Pretty in Pink, Weird Science, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and, Some Kind of Wonderful, which we're going through 3 of those in this process.
So, Michael, can I ask you?
Yeah.
Is this then ground zero for the 80s teen film?
This is ground zero for all teen films. It is ground zero for all television teen dramas. This is the film that first took teenagers little lives and thoughts seriously. They weren't just horny, kids in the eyes of like boomers who just wanted to pretend like, let's create a teen drama so we can see a bunch of TNA for the sake of like their horny asses,
Yeah.
And so this is about, sure, there is horniness technically in this film, but it's awkward because they're teenagers. And this was like, I definitely, you probably didn't see this in the theater, did you?
I don't think so. I was 11, so
yeah,
probably not. And it was R-rated, and it was a pretty part of what was so controversial about this film getting released is they really wanted to give it an X rating because Amy Heckerling had a whole scene when Stacy and Damone are getting ready to have sex, where not only do you see her naked, but you see him naked.
Yeah.
And so, like, there's this equality between both of them equally awkward. And she was pissed she had to cut it because she said that was a great scene to really highlight that awkwardness that gets lost.
Yeah.
But this had an X rating, and they had to kind of readjust the film, and Criterion re-released it with the actual footage of from the original, which is cool. But I love that this was an X rating. The other, so great on the production notes, other great note is there was one of the producers who was like, with the soundtrack, like, you have to include an Eagles song. And I think it was because he was the agent of the Eagles and Don Henley. So it's like you got the Go-Go's, and then of course you have the Eagles. You know what I mean? Right. Like those boomers pushing their shit on these 80s.
Oh, so totally.
I love
even
that.
Art Linson, like Heckerling talks about how during the performance where the Linda character played by Phoebe Cates, and we haven't talked about any of the actors yet, but we will. No. Like there's this scene where the senior is talking to the sophomore girl about how blowjobs work, and Art Linson is like, you need to do a bunch of close-ups of her lips around the carrot, and Amy Heckerling was like, ew, you guys are so fucking gross, and thank God she and Cameron Crowe were allowed to kind of sneak this film in the way they did, and even though they didn't get it. And that's like the ultimate theme of this film, if anything, is even as far as family pictures go, and this is how teenagers think, is the adults don't know what the fuck they're doing, and we should be in charge. And this is the great thing, is this is what this movie's about, is like the teenagers think they know everything, and thank God the adults are just leaving them alone to figure shit out.
And to that point, and I like that reading, and I think to that point, as we start the film, as we get into the meat and potatoes of the film, and this has a amazing kind of, title introduction where you go to the Galleria in Sherman Oaks, and you see the freaking arcade in all its beauty, Scramble, Pac-Man, Missile Command. They're all there, and it's gorgeous. Yeah. But you also see them having fun, but also working.
Yep,
and
work
that
is here again.
Work thing you've talked about really, really, for me, it hit me harder in this film than probably any other yet, and I can talk about that later. But, like, it really, I think now watching this one, it's like John Hughes, who obviously got his contract based on this film, probably studied it, and took this intro and just reworked it for the high school at 16 Candles.
Absolutely. Like because we did them in the order we did, and we spoke so much about the 16 Candles opening, and there's literally a shot that's identical of the boyfriend and girlfriend pocket in pocket instead of hand in hand, like each having each other's hand in each other's back pocket, So let's talk about that ownership, but let's introduce this cast, because this cast is absolutely incredible.
Amazing.
There's primary characters, but there's secondary characters. There's even a character who literally has no lines and is basically cut from most of the film, who happens to be Nicolas Cage,
Nicholas
Coppola, right?
Coppola.
His credit is Nicholas Coppola. This is true.
Crazy.
So we have Sean Penn as Jeff Spicoli, who he gets his whole section of talking about him later on. Jennifer Jason Leigh, who plays Stacy, who's sister to Brad, played by Judge Reinhold. And
so
then
think about that there.
I'm
going to introduce you for a second.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sean Penn, Jennifer Jason Leigh.
Yeah.
Two of the iconic actors for the next 40 years. start in this film, essentially.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
amazing. Anyway, go on.
And then Judge Reinhold, who was more of a flash in a pants kind of actor, but he had his moments through like Beverly Hills Cop. Obviously, his character in Beverly Hills Cop was beloved for its quirkiness. And then he did, what was the Bette Midler comedy he does where he and his wife are like kidnap her from with Danny DeVito. Doesn't that sound familiar?
Very bad people, or very.
Yeah, we'll have to look that up later. But it was a great film. That's a
He's
great
from
comedy.
Fredericksburg.
Oh, is he?
He is.
Virginia, great.
Exactly. Him and Danny McBride.
Yeah, and we have Phoebe Cates as, Stacy's best friend, Linda, the older, sage who knows everything about how sex works and being a young woman supposed
All
to work.
of 15s.
Yeah, right. But then there's and then we have Ray Walston, who I always just think of is from the science fiction TV shows, right? My Favorite Martian
Martian.
No, he's not in
Mr.
that
Ed.
show. Yeah, and Mr. Ed too. And so, but then we have these randos that are just there briefly in their weird roles. Like Forrest Whitaker plays the oversized football player, and so Eric Stoltz and Anthony Edwards are the stoner friends. And we already mentioned Nick Cage. But even in there's the guy who robs the convenience store is James Russo, right?
Totally. Yeah.
And so there's all these all this talent, and Amy Heckerling and Cameron Crowe both talk about how they basically had the pick of the litter because no one was making good content about young adults.
Yeah.
And they were all just making this schlock like Porky's and all of the, summer, spring break movies to come that even John Cusack gets put into with The Sure Thing that comes ahead and stuff like that.
And the pizza
which is
delivery
a little bit
guy,
better. Yeah.
The pizza delivery guy isn't better off dead.
Exactly.
He's the mailman.
Right. It's just wonderful.
So
and
good.
But let's
Kelly Maroney, who was in,
Maroney.
Night on the Comet.
Night of the Comet, which we've already done, yeah. Yeah, and there's so many, we're kind of obviously adults of a particular generation. We keep hovering around this set of actors and directors in these films. But this one's really, really important. And, we realize, I love the opening as you described, because I took so many notes of all these bits from that. Instead of meeting the kids and all these characters and these actors through the school, as we did in 16 Candles, we meet them at the mall. Why don't you tell us yours? What are your favorites in there?
Oh, I really like, the two girls checking out Brad as he's walking in, and there's that sense like the mall is kind of a little bit of a meat market for these kids.
Oh, totally,
and that's where you go to hang out, and that's where obviously, the arcade is everything to me. That would have been me. I would have had my shirt on, unlike Spicoli, but I would have been in there at the Pac-Man fully in 1982. So when you see this film, it's really like, oh my God, that's my life. And, I also used to go to the mall. We went to Roosevelt Field in Long Island. Have I mentioned I'm from Long Island on this podcast? And we would actually go to a pizzeria, very similar to there. The freaking record store? Are you kidding me? Yeah. That is just identical to, we would have Sam Goody, who ultimately bought Licorice Pizza. So, it is so similar to an experience I would have as an 11-year-old in a mall anywhere I think most people anywhere in the U.S.
Yeah, and there's in front of the record store, there's the Debbie Harry cutout, which has the great scene of Damone's 5 points of how to pick up a woman, which we might get to. We'll see. And I just remember about record stores, and there would be these life-size cutouts of these characters, and you'd be like, man, I wish I could get that. Same thing even later on at Blockbuster and the movie cutouts and stuff. These were I would have loved to have been a video store clerk or a record store clerk just for those things. Hot personal experience. I worked at a records hot take, not a hot take, it's just a personal. I worked at a record store for a hot minute. It was
Did you
it was
steal
an
CDs
old
and
school.
get kicked out?
No, I did. Yeah, I did steal some tapes. I'll admit that. It was one of the old school record stores at the Hartford Civic Center. That was also a stereo store. It was literally classic. There were the stereo salesmen adjacent to the record store. And of all things, my mom got me this job. She's like, "You're not making enough money for college." Meanwhile, I was like a slave to delivering newspapers, at the time, and working as a lifeguard in the summer. She's like, "You need a winter job," and I was like, "Okay." And I was a junior, and she knew someone that knew someone, and I got this job working as a record store clerk. And I loved music, but I didn't really know music, so I was way out of my league. But it was incredible space. Like in retrospect, it was like kind of amazing, and I was introduced to like the 8-inch releases for the first time ever. The 9-inch, instead of the 45s, you had the 9-inch release. There was the singles that were on the full record platter. And yeah, it was a culture unto itself. And I remember taking breaks and not knowing what to do because I didn't know anybody. And the mall
smoke back in the alley.
Yeah, and you just don't know. It's just such a funky culture unto itself.
It's actually important too because the name of the record store that Damone works in is called Licorice Pizza, and Licorice Pizza was an actual record store in the Valley and in Southern California. It ultimately gets bought by Sam Goody, which I think is an East Coast chain, but I don't know. But in fact, Paul Anderson, what's his middle name? The one who did There Will
Paul
Be Blood.
Thomas Anderson.
Yeah, he does a movie called Licorice Pizza, right, which is actually like what he says is an homage to Fast Times at Ridgemont High. Right. And the whole idea of this moment. And so the record store and what you're talking about is like essential to this moment of culture. And I think what the mall gets for me beautifully is that so much of what we're seeing in this movie is not only all the deep inner lives of these kids, despite all that, but also the world in which they live, which is, a kind of world of music, movies, right? Fashion, and all of that as identity markers to be who they are. And this film is filled with them, and it also deeply informed how I dressed and acted as a kid in Long Island in 1982, 83, and whatsoever. And we could talk about that. But this film is powerful as a kind of like transformer of how we saw ourselves in 82.
I think, it's funny too, because I feel like Damone's like new wave kind of look was on the cusp of being Miami Vice Don Johnson,
Absolutely.
Crockett character. It's like he's so like he has his collars up and he's wearing the sport coat and the skinny ties and the bright colors, and it's just incredible.
Piano scarf.
The piano scarf later on, it's just awesome. It's so wonderful.
It is amazing. The Pat Benatar lookalikes.
Oh my God, right? The dueling Pat Benatars that Linda plays. So Linda, played by Phoebe Cates, is the mentor, if you will. There's two mentor-mentee relationships in this film. There's like that are really great. We have basically Linda, who's a senior, kind of is mentoring Stacy. Stacy is like a sophomore and she's 15 and she's navigating her interest in sex and having her first relationships. And Phoebe Cates, playing Linda, is like, I'm the one who knows everything. And that's one of the big themes. And we're gonna like the idea of this performing as adults, like they're trying to be grown-ups, and we can talk about it because this is like, this is one I always think about. It's like there were these times where we in my neighborhood, there was this group of about 8 houses towards the end of our street, and it ended with this stream, and the Brown family lived around the end, but there were woods there too, and all the kids would drift toward the Brown's house because we could play games in the side yard, which wasn't their property. It was weirdly public property, and so we'd all be there. And but it would also bring in other people from other it was just a hangout area. And I just remember like being like in junior high, and you'd see high schoolers, and high schoolers seemed like adults in the 70s because they'd have big facial hair, and women wore tons of makeup and they'd be developed, and you'd be like so wide-eyed and crazy intimidated. And they were all probably like smoking enormous amounts of weed and drinking beer and stuff like that. And they were just terrifying. And I think that's like kind of this presentation between, we have Stacy and Linda, and then we also have Mike Damone, who's like the hustler in the film, like he's
the scalper.
He's a scalper of concert tickets, and also takes small sports bets too here and there, right?
Exactly. 14. I didn't mention the 14-point spread.
Yeah, I didn't mention that. Sorry. And then, he's kind of mentoring Mark Ratner, or Rat, as he calls him, who works in the movie theater in the mall. And so, but they both kind of look up to, and they're in awe of their maturity. Right?
Yeah,
like
totally.
their ability they understand how the world works. And that's what's so great about this idea is like, whoa, you guys are like full-fledged adults.
Yeah, and I think to your point, like I had a similar experience, like, even this film would parallel how I would see my brother and my brother's friends and their kind of sense of, adultness, like they're going to high school, right? They're drinking, they're joining this fraternity, right? They're getting into trouble at an AC/DC concert. Like, they have stepped over the line, like into this weird sense of adulthood. And I was probably more like Spicoli's younger brother, who would be like,
Curtis,
Dad did this. Yeah, Dad did this. Jeff, you're an asshole, right? Like, get out of here, Curtis. So that would be my relationship. But even that, I agree. Like, this is a world absent of adults, but a world in which the kids at a certain age, Brad, for example, play the adults. Mm-hmm. And I really think watching it this time was really compelled by the character of Brad and by his relationship to his sister. And there was a really strong sense of, I don't know, like, they're on their own. Like, and you mentioned this a bit in the notes, and I think it's true. Like, this is 82. This is the latchkey kid generation. This is mom going back to work. This is divorce on the rise. This is a lot of these kids feel like they're on their own, right? Like they're kind of left to fend for themselves, for better or for worse. They all have jobs, right? Like, every time it's a mention of a parent is they're gone or they're not around or you need to do something because they're not around. Like, there's a kind of sense of like, it's almost like Children of the Corn, right? But not. You know what I mean? But in the valley. It's true, though.
Yeah. No, I mean, it is so great. I mean, because the idea is there's literally one visible parent in the entire film. The scene in which Stacy is like going to bed and her mom kisses her goodnight, and she's there for literally like 3 seconds, and she says goodnight. And what does Stacy instantly do? She flips up her covers, revealing that she's fully clothed to go out, and she goes out her front window, doesn't even close it as behind her, which is awesome, and goes on a date with a 26-year-old as a 15-year-old girl. And you're just like, where are the grown-ups to tell her to not do that? What the hell? This is such a bad idea.
And when I was a kid watching this movie, that scene in the dugout with the Jackson Brown, she's gonna be somebody's baby tonight, which comes in whenever there's some sex
whenever
scene.
She has sex. Yeah, it's really weird.
It is weird. But like the whole idea of the graffiti on the dugout and the long shot of them having sex from the other side of it. It's like, that's one of those shots in this film, because I'm 11 years old, right? 12 years old watching this and kind of like, oh, it's almost like that moment in the wildlife where the guy's shooting up in the bathroom. It's the same thing with the sex. It's like, oh, and it's the same thing with the masturbation point. It's like,
oh my God,
something's happening. I'm not, as an 11, 12-year-old, fully understanding it.
Oh, I had no idea what was going on with the Judge Reinhold scene probably until I was in college. I swear to God. And it's so funny because this is also that era. One of the quotes I remember someone reading or talking about is like, this was the area of, you remember the PSA that would refrain at 10 p.m. on almost all the networks. It'd say, it's 10 o'clock. Do you know where your children are? And literally the answer is invariably no.
No idea. Especially in my family, no idea.
And so there's all these little quotes, and I'll just go through some of my more favorite ones, which were the only references to parents. Like we already mentioned Curtis, which is Jeff Spicoli's younger brother. It's like, Dad says you have to get up. Dad says you're going to be late, you butthole. Dad, Jeff threw a snorkel at me, and like we don't see dad. We have Damone like being encouraged to borrow his mom's car, or endless references. My parents aren't here; they're out for the weekend. That's like during, when Stacy invites Mark Ratner into her house, because it's like, my parents are away for the weekend. Brad's out with his friends. Boom, chicka, boom, boom, and that's the way it's kind of presented. But it's also not that way, because there is no music like that. It's just super awkward. And it's like, let's look at my photo album, because they don't know how to. Yeah, go ahead.
Can I do the next one?
Oh yeah, whatever you want.
My old man is a television repairman, and he's got an ultimate set of tools. I can fix it.
I can fix it.
Is your brother going to shit, or is he going to kill me? First he's going to shit, then he's going to kill me. There are so many lines in this movie. Again.
I know. And that's Jefferson's younger brother, and the Camaro scene, which completely is out of nowhere, that scene. So like it doesn't even need to be there, but it's just fun.
I was watching this with my youngest son, Tommaso, who's 15, and he was like, "Oh no!" When he was driving, he was like, "Oh no, oh no!" Like he could feel the tension, which I did when I was a kid. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, "Oh no, something bad's gonna happen."
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. It's like, and that's probably so much of the attraction to kids that went to see this film. And even though it was rated R, you can only imagine the number of kids that snuck into this film, because it's a rated R film, and you're under 17. You're not supposed to go with your parents, and everybody's like, "Fuck that!" It's like, here's my brother. He's 17. Let us all in, and then that 17-year-old would have like 16 brothers and sisters probably piling in with them. It's like, I'm their supervising adult, and they're like, whatever, let's sell some tickets.
Unlike the UK, rated R in the US meant nothing. But I learned that actually those numbers meant something in the UK. My son Miles was turning 15. We were in London, and so we go, and I want to show him Halloween, the remake of Halloween. So I go in there and I'm like, yep, he's 18, because I know that they had to do that. And my son doesn't look 18. And the woman's like, he's 18? And I'm like, yeah, he's 18, like being all fucking uppity. She's like, are you 18 to Miles? And Miles is like, yeah. And so ultimately she's like, you're not going to Halloween, just so you know, but that whole Bohemian Rhapsody music with Freddie Mercury, he's like, that's PG. You can go see that. I was like, I'm out of America. They're telling me what to do. I'm an adult. I'm a parent. You can't tell me what to do. And I was so pissed. Miles was like, what's wrong with you? I'm like, this would never happen in America. Anyway, that's my little bad parenting story part. Whatever at this point.
But that's it. That's the whole point, And so, there's all this, I think, and so we've spoken a bit about Linda and Stacy as like Linda trying to teach Stacy what to do, and there's these great ideas of her teaching her about blowjobs and teaching her about how much comes out, or no, how long her boyfriends last, and like how long did Damone last, these things about this, and what's so good is like, Stacy, who's the proxy for navigating all the awkward sex, Linda at the same time is presented as this person who has a boyfriend, Paul, in Chicago, and he works for an airline, and he's so mature, and they have a mature relationship. And by the end of the film, there's this wonderful moment where she's reading a letter to Stacy at the graduation dance. And mind you, that one of the things that's so great about this film is it basically encapsulates a year of high school. And so Linda is reading this letter that's a breakup letter to Paul. Saying like, you're not mature. Why are you doing this? Why couldn't you come back for my graduation? But by this time, Stacy's like, does Paul really exist? Exactly. And we don't even know. And Stacy's like, she doesn't care. She loves her friend. And at the same time, she's like, good for you, because, who wants to go out with a bunch of scuzzy high school boys that like, masturbate to a fantasy of you, like, ew, So she's like, if this is your way of protecting yourself by manufacturing this boyfriend that may or may not exist, it's totally understandable. But in comparison, we have Damone. And how does Damone like really teach Rat or Mark Ratner how to be a man?
He's got the 5-point plan. He's like, Rat, let me tell you, Rat, right? And his whole thing is like, pretend that you don't care, right?
Yep.
And that's his. And I think how many
Always
times
call
have
the
you
shots.
gotten always call the shots? But in terms of the the Damone advice, that pretend you don't care advice is actually gold. Right? Like, I am sorry to say it, but like, having lived through high school at the time I did, the people like me who were like feelings on their sleeves, here's your pound puppy, I think about you all the time. Like, the women are like, what? Or the girls are like, get out of here. The guys who could give two shits and who didn't care, like Damone in this regard, which is why I thought this kind of movie worked.
Jordan
They're
Catalano.
the ones. Yeah, they're the ones who kind of, So I was interested in Damone's tips, and I wrote them down, and I'm studying them still.
Yeah. Ordering food. Find out what she wants and order for the both of you. But do you do this? Anytime when things start getting heavy, Jim, play side one of Led Zeppelin 4.
Exactly.
Which is, by the way, funnily enough, hey, mama said the way you move, gonna make you sweat, gonna make you groove. So that album was like the soundtrack of my 11-year-old self as a Boy Scout with my best friend Chris Hall doing slave labor for the telephone company delivering phone books because Boy Scouts did not have cookies. They had fucking phone books to deliver. And we hung off. This is so wonderful. Like, this is so 80s. His dad would have this Chevy Blazer, and we'd fill it with phone books, and then we would literally dangle our feet off the flip down, back of the truck, and he would play an 8-track of Led Zeppelin 4, literally an 8-track, and it would just loop the entire time.
I love 8-tracks. In the car, no less. The 8-track in the car.
In the car, yes.
So that's
and so, and he and the great thing is, like, one of my favorite scenes is when and one of the things that's great about Damone is Damone actually, even though he's like a shitty friend towards the end of the film for a moment, Damone really actually says, come on, Rat, you're the shit. Put yourself out there. And he pushes, helpfully, him to go ask for Stacy's phone number, and they make a date. And this date is a performance of what they think adults are supposed to do for a date.
That's great.
And they go to this, and Amy Heckerling talked about how they intentionally got these chairs that were oversized to like engulf them so they look like little kids, and menus that were gigantic, and and they are having, she'll have the knockwurst, and it's like,
can we get another Coke? As he realizes he forgot his wallet. And then this big German, like Hausfrau comes to the table and like waitress, really like it. But it's interesting because that scene, which is another memorable scene, reminded me a lot of a scene in The Wire, the series The Wire, when those kids go out for the first time to a fancy restaurant with Bunny. And so that's, I think, season 3 when they're doing that. And they don't know what they're doing. And there is this complete sense of like dislocation. And this scene was interesting because they're trying to play adults, like they're trying to play into that role, to your point about this whole film. And it just comes off really strangely and comically.
Yeah. And so, Damone, kind of fucks up their friendship because he ends up sleeping with Stacy, and this is the incredibly well crafted awkward sex scene that Amy Heckerling almost gets the X rating for, and this is an offense to Mark because he's like, of all the girls, why did you have to pick you? And there's this confrontation between them in the locker room, and it's like, I'm the one who sticks up for Damone, like everybody says he's a loudmouth, and they almost get in a fight. But Damone is in that moment, even though he's like knows he's fucked up, and he is trying to be apologetic, and so Damone is not. He's not irredeemable by any stretch of the imagination. And that's why he's this fully fleshed out person as well. Oh, but wait, one to back up to.
Oh, yeah, there is another side to Damone that we can't forget, right? Where he
you give me yours. I want to tell you, I'm forgetting about his bedroom scene because I love his bedroom, and we'll talk about that in a second. But you first. What are you thinking?
Damone actually, after that little kind of moment in the pool house with Stacy, he has premature ejaculation, doesn't go very well, runs away. But then, turns out, a couple of months later, he got Stacy pregnant.
Yeah.
And Stacy comes to him and is like, hey, Damone, I'm pregnant. And he's like, what are you going to do? What are we going to do about this? And she's like,
Yeah.
well, I looked into it and abortion's $150. Maybe you pay half and give me a ride. And he's like, half and a ride. And Tommaso,
Yeah.
who is watching me with this, is like, he's acting like the victim when he got her pregnant. I'm like, good, Tommy. Yeah, that's good. But so it's interesting that he stands her up. Ostensibly because he can't get the money. He's trying to collect the money and he kind of... But anyway, it's a bad look.
No, it's a bad look, but it's also real because like he feels shame. He can't even afford this. You know, he can't figure out how to pay it. So he does what teenagers do. They pretend it doesn't exist. And so in some ways, even though what he's doing isn't forgivable per se, it's completely understandable based on who his character actually is. He's a 16, 17-year-old kid who doesn't know how to tell his parents this. He can't deal, so he hides, right? And just hopes he doesn't get caught. And boy, does he get caught out by Linda later on after this.
That's what
he's a little prick.
Yeah, that's a great scene, and there's a certain amount of satisfaction in watching him. But I agree with you. Even in the shower scene, he's not. He in the locker room scene, he's not a demon, right?
No.
He's a guy who made a bad choice and some mistakes, but he's a very different character, as are those kind of two role model characters, than the kind of comic relief and the character that's remembered most for this movie.
Let's do Brad first before we get. Let's hold off on Sean.
All right.
He's the cherry. We gotta hold off. I know we're gonna run out of time here, but let's do Brad first. So because Brad is important because he's the other
I'm
one.
On the clock here.
I know he's the other one who's role playing as an adult here. And he's a senior. He's big man on campus. He's got his 1960 Buick LeSabre, and he's got just 4 payments left. And he's becomes the butt of every terrible thing that could possibly happen to a boy who thinks he's on top of it. He's like, his ego is way up here, miles in the sky. And by the end of the film, he's just literally hanging out at the late night Quickie Mart. Worst job he could possibly have. And I think, because he's the employee of the month, he's able to get his friend Arnold a job at All American Burger. And it all falls apart in what I think is probably the funniest scene in the film, where he's practicing his speech to break up with his girlfriend, Lisa, his longtime girlfriend, Lisa. And he's saying things, I'm a senior now. I think I need my freedom. Oh, Lisa, don't cry. Don't do that. Meanwhile, he has a rag in his hand, and he's in the restroom of the bathroom at the burger joint, and there's this big black capital letter markers of big hairy pussy. The scene cuts to it, and you're just laughing out loud. And that's this contrast. They think they know what they're doing and being adults. And they think it's all going to be okay just because they're going to act adults. And meanwhile, this is where Brad becomes the butt of the beginning of abuse. And that's going to lead to Spicoli too. That's the other, I think, big lesson is in this film, adults are kind of scary. They're kind of abusive and they're kind of assholes.
Yeah. And you're right. He loses his job at All American Burger because of that guy who comes up and wants his money back and is a real asshole to him. Yeah. And he's like, screw you. He does what everyone wants to do who works at one of those, basically tells him off. And that doesn't go well. And his girlfriend, Lisa, is the ex-girlfriend of John Cusack in Better Off Dead. So there are so many connections.
Right.
There are just so many teen connections to your point. This was ground zero for all of those other teen movies that were to follow. And I really like Brad's character as we're talking about Brad because in the moment where we already talked about that Stacy is pregnant and is getting an abortion, she has no one to take her. So Brad drops her off at what seems to be the bowling alley. But in fact, he sees at the rearview window, she's running across the street and she's going to a clinic. And that's where it's happened. And it's brilliantly done because it's not melodramatic, moralized. She went, she got it. She comes out and Brad's waiting for her. And there's a really powerful scene of him just kind of checking in. Where are you? How are you? What happened? Are you going to tell me anything? If not, it's our secret. It's like, it was real. And I think Amy Heckerling and Cameron Crowe talked about this and extensively in the commentary and whatever. Like, they wanted this to be a part of the movie, and it was risky. And they did it, and they played it real. Like, they played it realistically. They didn't bring in all the politics, like you said. There was the rise of the 80s moral right, and don't do drugs, don't do anything. Like, be clear, be clean, and yet they're bringing in something as kind of explosive as a teen abortion into this movie, which is really a powerful moment in this movie.
Yeah, and many reviews I read that speak of, especially written by women, talk how this portrait of abortion was like a beacon in the context of all of that moralizing that went on and overwrought, like, oh, if you got the abortion, there's consequences, or, oh, being shamed into keeping the baby, were all the other narratives out there that existed at this time and continue to this day, frankly. And, Brad being the empathetic brother, is what really, really mattered and stood out, and it's great that happened, and so, but this leads to so there's all these there's a button. We're getting finally we should end with in a lot of ways because Jim's on a clock here, and
I don't want to go. Let's be clear.
No, is part of the kind of abuse of adults. I mean, well, just a couple more with Brad. It's like, so Brad loses his job and he gets another shitty job at a Captain Fish and Chips. And he again has like an abusive boss who's like, he's being forced to go to make a delivery to the IBM guys. Aye, sir. And he's forced to wear his uncomfortable, stupid outfit in his car. And the boss is just like, come on, show a little pride. And he's like, are you effing kidding me? This stuff is just so stupid.
Yeah. And that's the point you brought up in The Wildlife, where Cameron Crowe is married to the woman from Heart. Or no,
Yeah.
from is it Heart?
Yeah. Yep.
Yes. And he sees her, and then he realizes he has a hat on, and he throws it off. But you know what? Before we go to Spicoli, just Jennifer Jason Leigh. Like, we talk about Brad in that part, but how about Jennifer Jason Leigh carrying that character, right?
Yeah.
And those moments, and as if, there is no question about the abortion, and she is kind of learning about sex and kind of figuring out, like, maybe we're all running into this too quick. And, like, she in some ways is the kind of, like, ballast of this film.
Yeah, she's
and the
the
one
lodestar
that
for
keeps
sure.
everything together. And I didn't know what to make of her as a kid. And, obviously there's that kind of attraction, but also like, why is she so aggressive? And then like, you could be like Damone, like, oh no. But like watching it now, what Amy Heckerling is doing, right? Like, she's trying to kind of reinforce, like, A, you shouldn't be. If you need to have an abortion, do it. But B, like, what are we doing at 13 or 15 or 16 or 17, taking on these, sexual exploits that maybe we're not ready for. And I think that's the other point to your bigger idea of them all being adults or wanting to be adults is, are they ready for it? Right? Like, can they handle it? And that's what I think Mr. Hand kind of references. Can you handle being in my class? Can you
that's a
handle
really
this
great way
world?
to think of it. Yeah. And
it's
it's so great because you're right. Because Jennifer Jason Leigh plays this character as, not only is she not being judged by like Linda or, only briefly does Damone kind of judge, you wanted it more, but he instantly apologizes too, which is kind of crazy. Like,
it's true.
And so that's the only brief moment of judgment or slut shaming we have in the entire film. And so she never shames herself either. And that's what's so great. And she's just pragmatic, and it's just she is just such a strong, sturdy character. And it's no surprise that in the end, she's the one who decides to figure out I want romance, right? Anyone can have sex. I want romance. And, Linda's response is, romance? We can't even get cable in Ridgemont, which is such a great line.
It is
but,
great.
is the way to like introduce Spicoli is probably best through Ray Walston's Mr. Hand as the kind of avatar of adults don't get it. You mentioned it. It's like but he introduces himself to his class of U.S. history students. Like, I have but one question for you. Can you attend my class? Can you handle me? Can you handle adults that actually are going to, hold you accountable?
Yeah. And that's his whole thing. And I love Mr. Hand. Like, I think Mr. Hand, and my son who is watching Mr. Hand is like, that's like an Italian teacher. Like, there's that sense of like really intense, in your face. Like, they'll call out your grade in front of everybody. Like, you will be publicly shamed. And like, I think he identified with Mr. Hand as like the Italian extension, whereas he was mystified by the whole American high school experience. He thought the whole thing was too sexual in some ways, but at the same time, he loved this idea of what an American high school might be like, having never experienced it.
Right.
And Mr. Hand and Jeff Spicoli for him were, I think, with those two balancing of like this American kid who doesn't do any work and still passes, which he couldn't believe. And then Mr. Hand, who's this kind of relic of the old school, rigorous high school that maybe a generation before us knew, but we never really knew in the same way. So, yeah, it was cool to see those two battling it out.
Yeah, and Spicoli is like to Mr. Hand, I'm just here learning about Cuba and having some food, like. So what's kind of cool is, and we're going to get into Spicoli now, played by Sean Penn, who is the person who creates an archetype so clear and actually honest that it's not an archetype. It's a singular character. It's so realized. And then part of that is because he was a psychotic method actor, and he literally was in Spicoli's character for the entire film, which we'll talk about, which is kind of awesome to hear. I didn't know that at all. And, he's jousting with Mr. Hand throughout the film, because Mr. Hand, one of Mr. Hand's most famous lines is like, what is your generation's obsession? What is your fascination with truancy? What is it that gets inside your heads? The classic mantra of the parent, if like, you guys are so like, it's like and not to quote Bill Cosby in this moment, but he did have the best description of this. When he used to do his stand-up about being a parent, he would say like, all kids are brain damaged, right? Like,
Yeah, exactly.
And and Mr. Hand just thinks everybody's on dope, like everybody's just fucking high.
Yeah. But I mean, also the way in which Sean Penn plays that from the beginning, like he's known as the stoner in school, and like there's kind of, you get everyone's sense like he is this character, even by their standards.
Right.
But then you get this whole sense of a culture that he represents, between the language, between the Vans, between Mr. Zog's sex wax shirt, between all of these things, like the emerging idea, it's kind of, you got a new wave of surfers coming up, right? It's not the longboard surfer. These are aggro, hardcore surfers, different level of surfer, just like skating. And he represents like a whole new persona of Southern California culture. Yeah. And it is amazing. Like, to this day, he probably is that is probably one of the single greatest characters from film that I can think of, from my childhood.
Yeah, and all the language, like the gnarly and awesome, and then the use the mangled French and Spanish. Who got the Beaucoup Dolores today? I like mixing French and Spanish in a single sentence. It's just like incredible. And then, amazing. But at the same time, there's Sean Penn makes one of my favorite things. He makes these choices to be like super upright, when he's confronted with authority. And there's these moments like when the three of him, he and Anthony Edwards and Eric Stoltz, walk into to Brad's burger joint, and they instantly takes their shirts off, and like Brad immediately has to confront them with the policy of like, no shoes, no shirts, no dice.
No dice. You're quite the orator.
But if you watch Sean Penn as he's not looking at Brad but listening, like he creates the posture of like, I'm the defensive teenager. I'm straight upright, not looking at you, but I'm listening. And he does this multiple times, you know, and this is this part of this character that Sean Penn, all these, and one of my favorites is also, you know, there's the high school dance at the end and he jumps on stage to sing Wooly Bully. And there's this moment where he's just dancing to himself with his hands and he's gesturing. And it's like, what incredible singular choices Sean Penn is making in slapping the Vans in his head. Like he makes these choices that are so specific. Yeah, they're so specific and they're so realized that on top of this, you know, that's the stoner persona, but at the same time, he's just a kid too, right? Like he gets like the way he's demoralized by Mr. Hand. He's just a teenager kid trying to collect his ripped up like registration card and like, what do I do now? Even though he calls him a dick, which is awesome.
And like kind of as a high schooler seeing that, or as a junior high, it's like, oh my God.
Yeah.
He called his teacher a dick and his teacher just walked away.
Yeah.
But there's that other scene where he's got that like surf sweatshirt and he's got the turtleneck. The white turtleneck and the red surf sweatshirt, and he's just sitting upright, like you said.
He's super. That's one of his upright moments. Yeah,
and he's smiling, and Mr. Hand keeps on looking at him like, "What's going on?" Yeah. And then that's when you get the pizza delivery.
Yeah, and it's these defensive postures, but he's also like, I love it when he, towards the very end when he's paying for snacks in the Quickie Mart. He's just a kid who doesn't have a lot of money, and he's picking out his snacks, and he's super focused in this moment. He's not a stoner anymore. He's just like, I got to see if I have enough money. And it's this character. He's so real. And, you know, there's a great little note from one of the Hollywood Reporter articles where the guy who played Arnold, Scott Thompson, tells it's like, because Sean was always Spicoli and they just did not, even the actors didn't know what to make of him. Like they were like, they just kept thinking, where did they find this guy? You know?
Well, you said it too in the notes there, and he's getting the coins and he pulls out a hair.
Yeah.
And then he goes, and then that's the whole one of the great quotes from it when basically James Russo comes in, tries to rob Hamilton, but Spicoli comes out of the bathroom. He's like, oh, and then Hamilton throws the coffee on him. And then, you know, Spicoli's like, awesome.
Yeah.
All right, Hamilton, right? Like that just, I mean, there are so many quotes just from Spicoli that keep on circulating and did circulate. And I think you were saying, like, you know, one of the things where this is kind of like a mini Star Wars in its cultural impact. Like, as soon as this movie came out, people would watch it multiple times. But then it also started to work its way into the culture and the language of kids who had seen it. Like, they were trying to be Spicoli. They were talking like Spicoli. They wanted those checkered Vans. They wanted Sex Walk's Mr. Zog's shirts.
OP T-shirts. Remember that?
Forget it. Yeah.
Yeah. And you wrote a lot about, like, this is like one of the 80s style brand moments, right? This is like, they did, like, Vans had no idea what they were getting themselves into from this film. Like, Vans, like, sold out like hotcakes afterwards. And, you know, and the Valley Girl idea comes after this as well. And 2 years later, we actually have Nicolas Cage doing a speaking part, which is incredible. Yeah. And I remember the OP T-shirt being like a coveted object and wanting one so badly with the long sleeves and the flowers and, you know, along the sleeves and stuff. And it was just something that you had and you just treated with so much like respect because it was probably expensive too. It was a fucking T-shirt, but it's like a concert T-shirt, the way you treated concert T-shirts that you got at shows. You know?
Yeah. And Tommaso was like, speaking of concerts, Tommaso was like, so was $20 a lot for a Van Halen ticket? I was like, yeah, that was a lot of money. And the other thing too, I mean, and I'm going to let you have the last word, but I want to just say this quickly. It's like, one of the things we start to see, and this movie's a really good beacon of it, is how much 80s movies are not only important because I think there are a lot of great movies, but 80s movies are important and film becomes really important at this moment because it starts to determine a lot of this sense of culture and this notion of culture that kids had. It's not that it hadn't before, but like between the mall, between marketing, between this sense of fashion and songs and the way that MTV starts to go up, that the whole mediascape in which it determines a sense of what the 80s was and how we talk about the 80s in this retrospective, nostalgic way has so much to do with the films that defined it. And I think this would be one of those crucial films that defined like the 80s idea for a US kid growing up in this kind of fraction, like say 11 years old at 82 like I was. Like this is, a super important text, if you will.
Yeah. And I think to finish, because we're at the end here, I think we have, next John Hughes, his kind of seminal description of how the adults kind of inflict pain on their kids unintentionally, their parents. And that's going to be as we look at The Breakfast Club. But it is this idea of, thank goodness we had this moment of where these young adult teenage films were a reflection of the kids, which is like the 80s gets it quickly because it becomes so corporate super fast. And then they start to target kids, right? And they try to start to tell us what to look like and tell us how to feel. This was like, we're absorbing you first. And then sadly, the 80s corporatizes it later on, if you really think about it. And so,
I like that.
Ultimately, I think that's what we owe and why we're spending so much time with Cameron Crowe and John Hughes for this kind of 6-week cycle, which is kind of interesting that this is the first time we've done this. And I think it's interesting, and we might try to do something like it again. I was thinking with some horror stuff, I think would be a lot of fun.
Yeah, it is fun. No, that's
awesome. And so I think I can't imagine what this film would have been like if Cameron Crowe directed it. And so I think it's also important to say, like, Amy Heckerling is such an important piece. She goes on to make another seminal high school film for the next generation of the 90s, like millennial kids and Clueless. And, this moment of the stewing of the talent and the both the directors that are young and allowed to do these kind of things and say, like, the adults don't fucking get it. Let us do this, And then the adults, sadly, they come back with a vengeance, and they've done it for basically the same fucking boomer adults have been doing it for 40 years now, like trying to commodify our generation. Those assholes,
listen to Don Henley.
Yeah. All right. Well, looking forward to one more. We're breaknecking this, even though we got another one to do. And Jim, have a good day, and thanks everybody.
Bye-bye.